Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. A quite popular content creator on YouTube, Cardon Ellis of Ward Radio, was interviewed, and he had many interesting things to say. Cardon is a nice guy, but he fails in the most important distinction on the Book of Mormon that literally all Mormons fail on, most especially and egregiously the Mormon apologists. Let's take a look and I'll explain what I mean.
Rebuttals that you've done, what would you say to someone who says that there is overwhelming evidence that the church is not true? Would you argue that there's just as much evidence the church is true that it's not?
Oh, read more. Read more. At this point, I think that we have more evidence for Lehi's exodus from Jerusalem at 600 BC than we do for the location of Alexander the Great and half of the cities he claimed to have conquered.
So this is an interesting claim, and it's entirely false for a very obvious reason, which Mormons and their apologists apparently just can't quite yet grasp. And so I will try to explain this with a sample of a comparison. Cardon is comparing apples to oranges. And let me explain briefly what I mean. All of the parallels for Lehi's exodus from Jerusalem, 600 BC, let's suppose you have 175 of those. Does this establish that Lehi, the Lehi in the Book of Mormon, actually lived and existed and is confirmed to be that person Lehi in the Book of Mormon? Not just a name on an ostracon or on a metal tablet found in the Arabian desert or anything like that, but the Lehi, the same gentleman who took his family, Sarai, his wife, Nephi, Laman, Lemuel, Sam, went back and got Ishmael and his family, etc. Is he verified historically? Now, what I mean by that is we are justified without historical evidence of saying, no, this is a fiction. The reason why we are justified in this is simply because the claim for the Book of Mormon is that it's history. So that claim has to have historical evidence to verify that it is history. But first, we need to verify anyone in the Book of Mormon to actually have lived and did what said person in the Book of Mormon is described as doing. Mormonism doesn't even have that for any person mentioned in the entire Book of Mormon. You could have those 175 parallels, and we could allow you to double them, and then without exaggeration, double that again, and it would not convert a fictional story into history. This, I believe, is what the Mormons and their apologists fail to grasp. Let me give a very powerful example to show why Cardon Ellis's comparison is apples to oranges. King Hezekiah of ancient Judah was attacked by the Assyrian horde under the leadership of King Sennacherib. Sennacherib came from Assyria in 715 and 714, maybe between 715 and 710, let's say. Let's say 715 to 701. And he smashed the northern 10 tribes and their villages and their cities, and he got all the way to the very wall of Jerusalem and failed to take Jerusalem. So he went home. A miracle happened for Hezekiah, the righteous king. Remember, Isaiah was Hezekiah's, so to speak, court prophet. So Sennacherib left without achieving his full 100% objective. Archaeologically, we have discovered discovered the palace of that same Sennacherib, and on the wall of that same palace was found a carving of Sennacherib defeating the city of Lachish, a very important city in ancient Judah. But he didn't depict conquering Jerusalem because he didn't. There is a cylinder, I'll call it a cylinder, it's almost like a hectagon with inscriptions on it where King Sennacherib describes his destruction of the northern Israelite tribes. And he does mention that he had King Hezekiah of Judah caged like a bird in Jerusalem. Hezekiah in the Old Testament also attests to this invasion of King Sennacherib of Assyria. And there are many places where he describes his terror about the Assyrians coming and destroying everybody and everything all the way up to his doorstep, until the biblical record indicates that it was the angel of the Lord that smote the Assyrian army and destroyed 185,000 of them. And Sennacherib simply left camp, packed up, and went home without conquering Jerusalem. We have, from an outside verified historical archaeological source, the basis of belief and evidence that Sennacherib was very real. His work of invading the northern tribes was very real. His work of destroying Lachish, we have the archaeological remnant evidence of that battle at Lachish, including the great ramp they made to get up to the city wall and defeat Lachish. We have found the arrowheads. We have found the round stones that those people in Lachish were hurtling down onto the Assyrian army, just as it was described in the historical records. We have specific names of specific people in specific positions doing specific actions that have been verified in a fabulous cross-check from the secular Assyrian records themselves identifying actual historical people, and from the biblical record themselves verifying actual historical people and what they did and did not do. And we have that cross-check. We can say if a Japanese archaeologist, if an African archaeologist, if an American atheist, if a Catholic priest, a Mormon general authority, and a Baptist preacher all was to read that record, they would understand, based on the actual historical evidence, that Hezekiah is a real historical person who actually existed. This is what is missing with Lehi in the Book of Mormon. You can produce parallels till the cows come home. You can read more than you could possibly do in a lifetime because you end up sleeping for only 3 hours a night instead of the regular 8 or 9, and use that extra time to read many more hundreds of books that alone is insufficient to establish the historical reality of the person Lehi in the Book of Mormon. You could find parallels to fiction. Doubling those parallels does not make the fiction into an actual historical occurrence that happened. When you make historical claims, the basis of identifying and being able to give verity to those historical claims is evidence, not faith. Evidence establishes the reality of King Hezekiah. Evidence literally proves Sennacherib's Assyrian army ended up at Lachish and defeated Lachish by making a rampart. We have the remnants of that rampart. We can literally walk up it. We can see through the ash layer that Sennacherib, when he said, I destroyed so many of the inhabitants and I burned the city, we have that ash layer. We also have a mass grave on the side below on the hill where thousands of skeletons were hastily buried, the former inhabitants of Lachish. We have the arrowheads and the sling stones. We have everything, including the historical record. Therefore, we can conclude that that history is history. Without that type of a historical verification, we are morally justified in saying, no, I don't believe the Book of Mormon is history. It's not out of wickedness. It's not out of a desire to be obnoxious or evil that we do not give our assent to the claim. It is entirely the lack of historical evidence with which the Book of Mormon cannot be put into the realm of history until such evidence comes forth. For that specific Lehi, and verified and accepted as Hezekiah is by all the different types of scholars and all of the different types of peoples. Now, this doesn't prove that everything in the book of the Bible is true. It wouldn't prove everything in the Book of Mormon is true either. But it does give a fundamental ground substance to the historicity of that particular person named Hezekiah. And in this interaction with Sennacherib, we know the Bible record is history in that regard, including what Isaiah said as well. Even the aftermath of the invasion of Sennacherib and the ending of his life by his own children was identified in the biblical record, and we have that event in the secular history. It is this kind of evidence that the Book of Mormon lacks, and if you double or triple the amount of your reading of parallels, so that instead of finding 175 parallels to Lehi's journey out of Jerusalem 600 BC into the Arabian Peninsula and then eventually building a boat and sailing over to America, you could double that number of parallels to 300, and it would not move the needle an inch toward actual historicity until you first establish the reality of that specific person named Lehi and what he did and who he was. That, Cardon Ellis, is why the Book of Mormon is not accepted as actual history. It could be something else and still be true. But you Mormon apologists are the ones claiming it's history, and therefore you are required to produce the historical evidence for those people. This you have failed to do.